Good morning. This is Clarence again from Trosho Law Office PC here in New York City, New York. This is the sixth episode of our series, and the subject today is the 2020 census. Before you lost me there, please be counted. Call 1-844-330-2020. Go also visit my census2020.gov or fill out the form that you receive in the mail and return it. And rest assured that the information that you will provide will be private and fully protected. Now, this is significant and very, very important because the results of their census will determine the apportionment of seats in Congress, number one. Number two, the representation in the Electoral College that will elect the president eventually, and also determine the amount of billions and billions of dollars that will be given to each state for the next 10 years. Now, the federal grants that I'm talking about would cover the Supplemental Nutritional Assistance Program, the SNAPs, the Section 8 housing, and any other related federal services down the road. So this will determine the benefits and the future that Congress or representation you may have for the next 10 years. Now, in the past, this is just a simple head count, but nowadays it has added significance because of the recent developments under the present administration. Now, let me explain to you the premise. The premise is that the US Constitution and its implemental federal law require to have a census conducted every 10 years to determine or apportion the seats in Congress. Now, the last one was 2010, and the next one would be this year by law, which is set by April 1st, 2020. Now, because of COVID-19, this has been extended from April 1st to October 30, but 2 days ago, the Bureau of Census announced that the counting will stop by September 30, thereby cutting off the extended period. So it is very important for you to be counted. Now, back to what the law requires. Now, the 14th Amendment of the Constitution, which was ratified in 1868, provided for the apportionment of representation in Congress, counting the whole persons in each state, excluding the Indian stocks. Through the years, this has been a straightforward head count. But last year, the Bureau of Census under the Department of Commerce inserted a citizenship questions trying to verify whether or not you're a citizen in this country. This has been the subject of litigation because such a question would have a chilling effect on the immigrant community. You have to understand that there are roughly 11 million undocumented aliens in this country. That's what they call them. And if there's such a question, they'll be stymied or hindered or even stopped from prevented from participating in the process, and that would result in a serious undercounting of people actually living in the United States. This has been litigated. This went all the way to Supreme Court from New York, and in the end, the Supreme Court prevented the insertion of such a question. And an opinion penned by Chief Justice Roberts saying that the reason behind it appears to be contrived. Because initially, the Department of Commerce made a representation that such insertion of a citizenship question was in consonance with the Voting Rights Act of 1965, ostensibly to protect the voting rights of the minority. It appears, however, during the litigation, that such insertion was actually upon the recommendation of a deceased political consultant that suggested it with the hope that it will enhance and be favorable to the Republican Party rather than for such noble intentions. Anyhow, it went back to the New York court, and in fact, the Department of Homeland Security was actually penalized and made to pay for the litigation expenses because of this alleged or misrepresentation. Anyhow, the president tried to postpone it, thought of postponing it, but it could not be postponed because April 1st was set by law. And in the middle of the counting, July 21st, the president issued a memorandum directing the Bureau of Census to exclude in the tally from the apportionment base of the census, undocumented aliens. Now, this is bound to be a subject of litigation again, and I guess this is going to be a lively discussion, subject matter discussion for law schools throughout the country. But there's a question of who are actually inhabitants in the country. Obviously, tourists, visitors, businessmen, and diplomats are to be excluded therein. Historically, members of the military service who are not actually inhabitants were also excluded therefrom. But the question is, who are inhabitants? The 14th Amendment was passed in 1868, and it provided for the counting of whole persons in each state, excluding Indians not taxed. Now, one way of looking at it is that there was an exception, Indians not taxed, and that exclusion should be exclusive. Otherwise, it would have provided for an added authority to determine or add some more people who could be excluded therefrom, but it did not. Another way of looking at it is that counting whole persons therein. So it's a question of whether actually you're a physical person and therefore an inhabitant and should be counted, or should you be a legal person, entity that is allowed to stay here. Now that is where the issue is. Now you have to understand, when the amendment was passed in 1868, there was no immigration or document-based distinction. In 1868, it was only in 1875 in what they call the Chinese Exclusionary Act. And if you may ask, what is that? You have to understand that during the railroad expansion in the US, there were so many Chinese men who were working in the railroads, and they were literally importing women from China. And that law was passed to exclude Chinese women from entering the country. Obviously, so that consequently, the vibrant Asian community could not practically grow, because apparently when you have men and women, forming a family here, that community is bound to increase. So a question of who's a whole person, inhabitants, and who should be excluded. Hypothetically, I have to add that if you've been living in this country for 15 years, should you be a person that should be considered as inhabitant, or should you be a person that legally should not be recognized as an inhabitant, or under the letter of the law should not even be a person at all? Now, it is not as simple as that, because the federal benefits, although undocumented aliens, and the public charge is one of them, are supposed not to be excluded or supposed to be disqualified if they do receive it, I have to tell you that there are roughly 11 million undocumented immigrants in this country. Approximately, based on some estimates, there are 3 million households with an undocumented or two members therein who are undocumented. So when we're talking about federal benefits, we're actually talking passively for children who are US citizens and whose parents are undocumented. If they will refuse or prevented from participating, or chilling effect, to participate in the census, that means the children will be excluded from the counting, and the corresponding benefit would also be discounted. You have to understand that those benefits are for US children, for example, simply because the parents are scared to participate, or any other member of the family are worried that they might jeopardize other members of the family, then the federal benefit that should have been afforded to them would be discounted, and therefore the corresponding burden on the states would be greatly increased. Now, these are issues best resolved in litigation, best discussed in the classroom, but the memorandum itself has a practical problem. If you were to exclude undocumented aliens, that's what they call them in this country, from the census, how will you make a distinction now if the questionnaire for the census has already been set and there's no citizenship question because it has been negated by the Supreme Court? Down the road, how could you practically make such a determination? And if there is such a source, would that source be acceptable legally, factually, and even be accurate? So those are issues that you have to deal with. But today, I'm here just to remind you, the counting of the census will stop by September 30, not as previously announced until October 30. So the counting will stop September 30. You have to participate and be counted, right? You need to go call that number 844-330-2020, or you go visit mycensus2020.gov, or if you receive a form in the mail, fill it out and send it back to the sender or to the proper offices. And if there's some people working in the neighborhood, please make sure that you are counted in the census. The information that you will provide will be private and fully protected. Now, as a sidebar, I have to tell you what happened before. I know personally some people who work with the Bureau of Census doing the counting. This was way back in the prior administrations. And in a neighborhood, if someone sweeps through a neighborhood, ICE, for example, and picks up people there, and they actually went to the neighborhood, nobody actually wants to participate anymore in the counting. Any trace or appearance of being an official representative by the government would actually be shunned by the community, simply because they have other members and they've heard stories and they also witnessed undocumented people being rounded up and actually detained. So that by itself sends a message. And the memorandum itself by the president, no matter whether it's legal or practical or even implementable, actually may have a chilling effect. Now, the practical side is this. California, for example, obviously has the highest number of undocumented immigrants in the country, and it may result in less representation in Congress. Now, the unintended consequence of this memorandum also would be is that in Florida and Texas as well may be affected by the consequent discounting of people in their respective states. But the ultimate result would be colored community will be greatly discounted. Now, it's a question to ponder upon, to think about it, but hopefully at the end of the day, you reach this far, please be counted. So again, my name is Clarence. Please stay home and be safe. And if you cannot stay home and you have to work just like me, we'll try our best to be safe. Okay? All right. Thank you.